living through the very worst of times in Jerusalem, in Israel, in Palestine, in fact in the entire region. We're so worried about what's about to develop in a much worse way in Lebanon. Of course, Syria is a neighbour of ours, also continues in a terrible state. Jordan is made unstable, and our diocese covers all of that region. So our bishop is an archbishop, known to some of you, Sam. He sends greetings, and I bring greetings from him and from all the people, the clergy of our diocese. The diocese covers our churches in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. So it's an area of extraordinary tension, and it's an area that has known tremendous trauma and war and division, but never in recent times, possibly never since the foundation of the State of Israel in 1948, has there been a time as bad as this. And of course, people focus on October the 7th and the awful, distressing, catastrophic events of that day, when a massive failure of Israeli intelligence, of security, allowed a breakout of what is effectively, in reality, a siege of Gaza, and an explosion of violence that took place on the Music Festival of young people celebrating there on the kibbutzim, on the border of Gaza, and a military base right there. And that continues in the form of the hostages, over 100 Israeli hostages, still held in Gaza in terrible situation. And my heart goes out to them and to their family and their close friends who are living that trauma day after day after day. And what has happened to them is unbelievable. But in all reality, without minimizing the terror of that day, it is actually cast into a shadow by what has gone on since. Because for almost a year, since October the 7th, Gaza has been subjected to a living hell, day after day after day. And I don't need to go on too much about that, because you will have seen it in your news, you will have read about it, and you are aware. But it is really important that our empathy, our sympathy is across all communities. This is a disaster for everybody. And it's not about comparing and saying this is greater than that, but we need to look at the brokenness and the fear and terror for everybody. And I think that has arisen, not out of the events of one day and everything that has happened since, but also everything that has happened before. So the idea that this war started on October the 7th is true on one level, but we need to look at the conditions that have created a situation where such an explosion of violence could take place. And of course, people will talk about what Israel has had to endure and what it's like for Israel to exist, surrounded by countries that they feel, with some reality, that they are out to destroy them. But the suffering that has been visited upon Palestinians since 1948 and the trauma of them having lost so much. Hundreds of thousands lost their homes and were forcibly ejected and moved into new areas. And the continuing injustice that they have experienced of failure to be able to have their own land and their own nation, and restricted in so many ways, made an explosion of violence like what happened on October the 7th almost inevitable. And we can talk about that. And the extraordinary suffering of the people in Gaza, the death and devastation, the complete loss of all hope, the devastation of the infrastructure, the death of
children, women and men, many of them civilians, cannot be underestimated. But sadly, and this is less well reported, the awful situation that is now being experienced in the West Bank. The West Bank contains nearly 2.5 million Palestinians. Sometimes people hear the West Bank and they imagine it's just sort of the bank of the Jordan River. But if you take the entirety of the land called the West Bank, you're looking at a fifth of the entire land mass that you may say from the river to the sea, Israel and Palestine together. 1/5 of that is the West Bank, and 2.5 million Palestinians live in there. There are 750,000 illegal Jewish settlers who live in that area too. And since October the 7th, the experience of Palestinians living there, many of them, their villages and towns, alongside Israeli settlements, and the actions of the Israeli soldiers who can move into the West Bank and into any part of the West Bank freely, and are causing a devastation of fear and of destruction, ostensibly, and with a degree of reasonable justification on one level, going after who they consider to be terrorists, but using that as an excuse to decimate communities and to kill not only those that they identify as terrorists, but innocent civilians too. So there have been nearly, I think the current figure, 750 deaths of Palestinians in the West Bank alone, aside from the 42,000 nearly in Gaza. So all of that is a litany of pain and trauma for everybody. And it means that all the people of the land are brokenhearted. And those of us who live alongside those who live there are brokenhearted. And the predominant feeling for me is of the most profound sadness at what has occurred. And the question that has been with me really from the beginning, but with increasing sharp focus, is what does it mean to be the church in a state of war? How do we, as the Anglican presence, alongside all our Christian brothers and sisters, live out a ministry that is the holy commissioning of Christ himself to live a life of love and service and reconciliation? How do we do that with integrity? How does the diocese do it through their ministries, and how do we individually do it as Christians and as clergy? Well, firstly, I think it's really important that we do not sugarcoat the situation and try and present a brighter picture than is the reality. So I'm here to try to convey something of the truth of the situation, neither to exaggerate it nor to underplay it. And I think it's really, really important that the global Christian community is prepared to look at this situation with honesty and to speak, and not to avoid it because it's difficult, and not to avoid it because it's complicated, but to seek to engage with it, because although it is a long way away, and it may feel in some senses a world away, what is happening in Israel and Palestine has a lot to do with all of us directly. Partly because of the history of European and American engagement with the Middle East, that historically we have created a number of the problems that are still being worked through in such a painful way, but also because the current policies of your government, my government, of the global community is not helping. And so simply saying it's got nothing to do with me, I think actually has no moral justification. What to do about it exactly, I have got no absolute clarity. I can't give you 5 points. You know, if you do these 5 things, you're in the clear. You've done everything. You can sleep well at night. But we can talk about what might be helpful. But it's for each of us to find the way that we can engage. And just before finishing, as it were, introductory remarks, I want to talk about the ministry of the college. A number of you have been to St. George's College. A number of you have been to Israel, Palestine without coming to the college. God bless you. You didn't make the best decision. Next time, it's not all bad, but you know, next time come with us. We do have a unique ministry, and I'm proud to be able to say, because it's not of my creating. It's what I inherited, and I hope I have picked that up in the sacred trust in which it was given to me, and continued the legacy of what I received. And that is to curate for people an experience of walking in the land of the Holy One, which in some ways I think is a better way of us describing it, because it does not feel like a holy land at the moment, but it is the land of the Holy One who walked in the land. To curate an experience of that, which is truly transformative, which enables people to engage with the beauty and wonder of truth of Scripture in a way that makes the Scripture come alive for those who have walked in the land in a way that stays with you forever. And I have lost count of the number of times that people have described their transformative experience in so many ways, and so often with people saying, I will never read Scripture in the same way again. It has come alive to me. It's like I'm reading in Technicolor, reading in 3 dimensions rather than words on a page. And I think that transforms the way we hear Scripture, and it helps us to engage with it. And so that's the spiritual core of the experience. But I think what St. George's has always done and continues to do is to enable that experience to be also to be politically and historically engaged, so that we do not give people an experience of walking 6 inches off the ground, not rooted in the reality of today. So we talk about the experience of Jews, Muslims, and Christians in the land today, the good things of the ways in which they have related, but also the pain and the divisions that are the reality. And to give people a sense of the historical and political context, so that people don't go away having had a beautiful spiritual experience, but that does not enable them to engage with what happens on the news, in the news. And that, I think, is our calling and our charism, is to blend those dimensions together so that people have a truly rounded, not a comprehensive experience, because you can't do that in 2 weeks. I've been there 6 years and I'm still learning so much. But the college has been closed since, well, there are 2 or 3 people here who are with us on October the 7th. And I'd love to, put your hands up, please. I would love to talk to you about the experience of the group that was with us when October the 7th happened. It was an extraordinary, difficult, but actually bonding experience. But since then, since that group left and we didn't evacuate them on October the 8th, they stayed a little longer, the college has been closed. We have not had a single pilgrim. We've had a few visitors, a few senior clergy who've come on solidarity visits, and a few other close friends who've come to us, but not a single pilgrim group. And I can't see the time when we will. So I'm here partly because the college is in a crisis, and Chrissy is going to talk a bit about that. But I hope that those who care about the Christian community in the land, and we are an institution that belongs to the Diocese of Jerusalem. It's not It's not a Church of England institution, it's not an Episcopal institution, it belongs to the local church. And every bit of benefit that comes to St. George's College benefits the local church. And so we are looking at the potential of the college having to close and to make redundant all our staff, because we cannot continue indefinitely with no money coming in. And I hope that the value that people see in the Christian presence in the Holy Land and in the ministry of St. George's will evoke a response that enables you to support us in prayer, of course, first and most importantly in prayer, but also in terms of your practical support for us in the many different ways, which will include financial ways. But I want you to feel connected with us in my presence being here. I am able to travel. Most of my staff are not able to travel. They're not free to leave, to come and go in this way. So I come to represent them. And I want to be able to carry us through this crisis. And at some point, please God, sooner rather than later, that we will be able to reopen and invite people to come back to experience the beauties and the wonders of the land, which reveal to us the truth of salvation in Jesus Christ, which did not just accidentally happen in somewhere in the Middle East, but arose out of the history of our salvation from Moses through Abraham, through the prophets, to John the Baptist, until the Messiah, the Christ, came to reveal to us the full extent of the gift of salvation in Jesus Christ. And that is the ultimate spiritual heart of the ministry of St. George's, to enable people to see the heart of the love of God in Jesus Christ, in the land in which he was born. He lived his ministry, died, resurrected and ascended in the land, but for all the people and all the world. And that's what I truly want to be able to reinitiate in time, when somehow the peoples of the land find a way of stopping the violence and getting back to working for reconciliation, peace and justice. Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much.
Dean Richard would like to take any questions that you might have for him.
When would be the best and safest time to go back to Israel?
When will it be safe? If you can work that out, and you may have more clue than I do, please let me know. Honestly, we don't. I'm just going to take my microphone off. I'm getting a bit hot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Desiree.
Sorry, I've just given the sound man a heart attack.
I think there is someone behind Desiree. Oh, and Mary Jane.
And if you can't answer this, I totally understand, but do you have any idea what a solution could be?
No.
Okay. I think that's
No.
the entire matter.
You know, the short answer is no. The long answer is I don't think so. And the slightly longer answer is that's what the people of the land have got to work out. Because the easiest solution is I'm going to kill everybody who doesn't agree with me. And you know, it's extraordinary how people respond to that idea and go, yep, that's the best way to sort this out. And it is so profoundly and utterly wrong. And it's wrong everywhere. It's wrong everywhere. It's wrong in this land and everywhere in the world. And we know that, am I doing something wrong here? We know that Israel-Palestine is not the only place where death and destruction is the order of the day. But in the land where the history of salvation was revealed to the world, for the people who find common humanity through our Father. Everything that is holy, good, and true. But there's no point in just being all holy and spiritual about it. We, they, but the world community has got to find a way to get beyond winners and losers, to find the way of affirming the beauty of common humanity and simply setting up one side as a state with all the rights, privileges, and duties of a state, and the other side as a nation of terrorists, establishes a paradigm that is only going to do harm. And if there may be people that you know, I profoundly hope there's nobody here who would veer in that direction, but you will probably know some people who, if you talk to them, might sort of say something along those lines. That view has to be corrected. And if we all have to do the hard work of saying it is the human calling to work out how to live in our diversity. Because whilst we may think it would be great to only have to live with people just like us, that's not available. Because actually we're all so different. We can barely live with one another in one church. It takes quite a ministry to, you know, but once you get beyond your church and your denomination and your religion and your ethnicity and your nationality and your part of the world, it brings so many other challenges. And if we can't find ways to do that come from the center of us, we're really done for. And in Israel, Palestine, we're giving a lesson to everybody else about how much damage that does. So you see, I did have half an idea, but it's...
Thank you.
I'm curious, since you're on the ground, how a lot of the Jewish people are reacting to what's going on in Gaza. Because on the one hand, you hear stories of some of the people supporting what's going on, and then you see stories of protests, and I'm just wondering what your sense is in terms of how the Israeli people are reacting to what's going on in Gaza.
There's a huge diversity. You know, as with any country, you can't say, you know, Americans think. Could you imagine finishing that sentence? And so in the same way, you can't say Israelis think or Jewish Israelis think. And you've got to remember that in a country of 8.5 million Israelis in Israel, 2 million of them are Palestinians, citizens. And that's excluding Gaza, of course, and it's excluding the West Bank. But across the entirety of the land, there are roughly 7 million of each. And it's roughly the same. But what do Israelis think? So there are those that go literally, as far as I'm concerned, they can all die. And I won't be happy until they're gone. Either of their own free will into Egypt, into the sea, or dead. And there are people people in government, in the present Israeli government, who will say that proudly, not in secret, but in public. And right the way through every bit of that spectrum, who are working every moment of every day for justice for Palestinians, because they realize that until all Israelis see the humanity of all Palestinians, there will be no peace in the land. But I think, you know, those are the extreme ends, and they are happily on that end a minority, sadly on that end of a more, you know, inclusive, humane end, a minority as well. In the middle, you know, up until October the 7th, I would say the majority of Israelis had not the first idea what was going on in Gaza or the West Bank. And they lived in a fantasy bubble because the media did not want to show what was happening, and people did not want to hear what was happening. And through the majority of the war, I would say, and this is coming to me from Jewish friends, that the majority of Jewish Israelis did not know the level of brutality and destruction happening in Gaza, because their media is largely either government controlled or so sympathetic to the government that they were not showing. What they were showing was our heroic boys and girls doing extraordinarily brave things against those terrible terrorists. And they are being restrained and responsible and doing their best in a difficult time. And they would not show the things that I guess you will have seen of the trauma of a child who has seen his entire family bombed in front of him or her. They have been protected from that. And, you know, this is what happens in war. It happened with you during the Iraq War, and it happened in the UK too, in the Iraq War. We get the government spin, and you have to work really hard to see something different. So, yeah, a broad spectrum, but not very often the bare truth.
In other words, in some countries, the sources of information that come from the outside are controlled.
Yeah.
Does the
Yes.
yeah.
So Al Jazeera, which I watch a lot, an Arab news source, that has been banned. So there are no Al Jazeera reporters allowed to operate in the land. We are monitored very closely. I am free to write what I want, but I know that I am being monitored. Palestinians are not free, and Palestinians have, I think the latest figure I heard was that Palestinians have reduced their engagement on social media by 70%. And there are numerous cases of people who have liked certain posts or written certain posts. For instance, I took a bishop from the Church of England to the military court on the edge of the West Bank. She is the lead bishop in the House of Lords for issues of justice and prisons in the UK. So I thought it would be particularly interesting for her to see the way in which Israelis were imposing a system of supposed justice in the West Bank. And so we went to these porter cabins. There were about, in the space, twice the space of this church, about 20 porter cabins. Each were a courthouse with a judge and lawyers. And we went in and we saw the conduct of the court. And then we came out and we went to an ancillary room and talked to 3 of the lawyers who were working with their clients in different rooms. And one of them said, we were saying, you know, what's the case of your client? What's happening? He said, well, her brother died, was shot dead by the IDF. They say he was a militant. She wrote a post on Facebook on the day of his funeral, praising him, not what he was accused of doing, but just saying, expressing her love, affection, and respect for her brother. On the strength of that, she was arrested, taken into prison, and this was her court case. Now, I don't know all the details of that. I did not read the case, but that experience I have heard repeated over and over and over again. So the country is it is virtually a police state. We are very close to that being a reality, and the level of control also on Israeli Jews who are showing any skepticism about the conduct of the war or calling for an end to the war. They are being sacked from posts as teachers, as professors, as doctors, and all sorts of things. Some of them imprisoned on the strength of things that they have said. So there is no freedom of speech. I mean, it's not a total absence of free speech, but it is seriously under attack. And what I have to share with you is that the state of Israel is becoming, I mean, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but it is becoming a fascist state. And there are people in the government who are avowed racists. You look at their words, it's quite plain. And they are in government. They're not on the fringes. You know, we've got racist politicians in our political system, but they're on the far fringes. They're not in government. And when you bring them into government, that empowers the crazy racist people to continue their actions. And what's happening in the West Bank with settlers who are marauding around the community. I mean, for instance, just today I read in the Times of Israel, which is quite a conservative paper, a story about a Palestinian farmer in the West Bank who has suffered an attack by a group of settlers from the nearby settlement who burnt his olive grove. 900 olive trees have been destroyed. And on the whole, vast majority of cases, the Israeli authorities do nothing about it. So because there are parts of the government that say that's acceptable behavior, that's okay. And so they're not going to pursue them, and they're not going to charge them, and that's certainly not going to put them in prison. So I could say so much more about that, but just in brief, this is the brutal reality. And the idea of a responsible government just trying to deal with a terrorist force in their midst is so far from the truth. Which isn't to say there aren't deep problems and there isn't an explosion of violence in the Palestinian community. There is. And that obviously has to be engaged with, but there are deep and very serious problems within the Israeli government, which is on a trajectory which is ultimately self-destructive as well as destructive of everything else.
How about one more question or two? Kristen and then Sarah. Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed in American media is it doesn't just become between Israelis and Palestinians, it's about Jews and Arabs. And there's very little reporting about the Christian community.
Yeah.
I remember being on pilgrimage and you telling me that the numbers of Christians in the land of the Holy One are dwindling.
Yeah.
And the Christians in the West Bank, I imagine, are not.
It's terrible.
Yes.
So we're less than
Know about the plight of the Christians?
1% already in every part of the land. I mean, actually, like about 0.1% in Gaza, and that's a deep worry. There has been a mini exodus of Christians from the West Bank and from Israel as they look and see. They do not see how they can bring their children up in safety and security. So we're hearing over and over again of whole families that have applied to leave the country and go to Canada, to all sorts of parts of the world where they've already got family. And we really worry that the Christian community may not have the infrastructure to run as a community with the schools and the institutions and the clergy and the other things that are essential to maintaining the life of a vibrant Christian community. We're really worried about that. And, you know, there are particular cases that I'm involved with. I'll mention one of them possibly tomorrow in my sermon, but there's a family in a beautiful unspoilt valley just outside Bethlehem who have had their land stolen from them by a group of settlers. And that's partly to enable the growth of a settlement from further south right up to the edge of the greater Bethlehem area. And that will make the life of all the Christians living in that area very, very difficult, because once you get the settlements, the settlers start coming out and intimidating, threatening, and destroying the land and the property of Palestinian villagers living nearby. That is being replicated all over. But despite the fact that we are so few, I like to think we're a bit like a concentrated perfume, which when we are dropped into a larger amount of liquid, we infuse everything. And I think it is the calling of the church to be the fragrance of Christ. And through our institutions, like our hospital in Gaza, Al-Ahli Hospital, which miraculously is still continuing its ministry. It's the only fully operational hospital in the north of Gaza. And I could talk a long time about that, but also our schools, our other hospitals, the Princess Basma Center for Children with Disabilities on the Mount of Olives, and all of these other things exist for the benefit of everybody. I mean, actually, we don't serve Jewish people because Jewish people won't come to our institutions. But if they needed to, we would serve them, because we serve people without discrimination. But certainly for Muslims, and the vast majority of people that we serve are Muslims. This is what we exist for. And however small we are, we will continue to seek to be the fragrance of Christ in the midst of whatever suffering there is.
I want to come back and ask you to elaborate a little more on what American churches can do, what our churches in Virginia can do. I know this is a tremendous frustration on the part of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, and especially Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. The challenges my church, Emmanuel Church on the Hill in Alexandria, faces, which I think a lot of you in this room faces. We want to respect concerns, cares, and trauma of Jewish brothers and sisters. We have a synagogue right up the street from our church. And the other challenge is there's so many terrible things happening in the world. You know, there's Sudan, there's Gaza, and so people don't make the connection of all the terrible things happening in the world. What's happening right now in Israel? The point you made, we are very much part of this on Monday or Wednesday. So could you elaborate a little more on your earlier comments about what you would like to see American churches, or the churches we represent in this room, do in the face of those two constraints, which are such minor constraints compared to everything people in Israel and Palestine do? What can we do?
Firstly, keep talking about it. Don't let the difficulties and the fear of saying or doing the wrong thing stop you from doing it. We have to be courageous. We all have to be courageous. And I would say reach out to your Jewish neighbors in the ways that you are and listen to their fears and worries. But, you know, I simply won't accept that talking about the plight of Palestinians means that I'm being anti-Semitic. And it's not reasonable. And I don't think most reasonable Jews would say, as soon as you start talking about that, you're being anti-Semitic. So we have the right, and we must exercise that right, to highlight what we consider to be issues of profound, the attack on human dignity, when we see it there. And so do not allow your fear of saying the wrong thing about our Jewish brothers and sisters to stop you talking about what is a grotesque attack on humanity in Gaza and increasingly in the West Bank and probably in Lebanon too. So keep thinking, keep engaging. I think the feeling for Palestinians, and I can only talk about them in Israel and Palestine, is that they have been abandoned by the global church. I don't think that is totally true, because you're all here and I know that you care, but they don't hear it, they don't feel it. They feel that all the sympathy is for Israel and, you know, their right to self-defense. And I keep saying, I don't hear anybody saying that Palestinians have the right to self-defense. How are they supposed to defend themselves? And so they feel like they're just fodder that can be wiped out and nobody really cares or maybe even notices. Again, I don't think it's true, but it is true on a certain level. And I think, however difficult it is, keep talking to your elected representatives to say that providing weapons to an increasingly dangerous, I would say, rogue government is not the responsible thing to do. We don't have to abandon them totally, but Netanyahu and his government don't care what anybody says. They are not interested in our words of condemnation or deep regret or deepest concern about this, that, or the other. They are only concerned about what is done. And I think if they don't see there is any impact on them committing atrocities, and there are countless numbers of them, they will continue to do it, because the pressures from certain parts of their community are to keep going ever stronger for the total victory that they seek, that group of Israelis seek. Support the Christian communities through our diocese or other groups that you know and support and you trust, and, you know, engage with them and their stories, share their stories around as widely as you can, to address stereotypes and inaccurate stories about who Palestinians are. You know, and please support the college in the way that you're going to be asked to do. And there are so many other things, but, you know, nothing is going to change it overnight. It's going to be the joint action of so many people over these coming months, but we can't afford to look away, because it's painful, difficult, a bit awkward, or whatever. Stick with us, stay with us. We need you. We need your prayer, your love, your care and support, practical, and in whatever ways you can. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, and it's really a beautiful segue into Chrissy from the North American Committee for St. George's to come up and just say a word. And Dean Richard will continue the conversation after our speaking portion, so yes. Thank you so much, and we'll
While I believe I actually could project to everyone, I know that that doesn't really solve everybody's purposes. Thank you, Dean Richard, for that powerful and moving testimony of what life on the ground is like in the land of the Holy One. And my role here tonight is to direct your attention to the lovely brochure we've just had printed, to explain a little bit about the fact that we are embarking on a major, for St. George's, a major capital campaign in order to ensure, as best we possibly can, for the future of the college through this war and into the future. I have served on the North American Committee since before the pandemic, like right before the pandemic. My last trip to Jerusalem was for St. George's 100th anniversary, which was a wonderful, glorious time, even though it snowed and it hailed and it poured. It was January, but it was glorious. And then we had 70-degree days. So, you know, it was Jerusalem in January. And we came home and the world changed. And so a whole bunch of my time serving on the board has been looking at how do we keep this fabulous institution and its fabulous employees able to continue in their jobs and keep it open so that we hope to restart everything again. Over on these tables, there are some catalogs that actually got printed in 2020. And so they're really out of date, but they do show the variety. For those of you who have only maybe been once to St. George's, there's such a variety of things that it offers. And the one thing that I would have asked Dean Richard to expound upon a little bit more is the role that St. George's College plays as the Anglican Center in Jerusalem, working ecumenically with all of the various denominations, both the Christian denominations and other denominations of other faiths within the city to actually affect kinds of changes and work around the area, and putting out statements of opposition to the way that war is being conducted. And I think that's a really important role that the Anglican Church can play in Jerusalem and around the world too. So I commend all of the power of what Dean Richard was sharing with us, and the power of your memories of having been there, and carrying that with you. I have had the great fortune of being to St. George's 3 times, all very different times of year and very different experiences, and they were all fabulous. So the brochure walks you through what we're looking at doing. It's a to round up, it's a $1.2 million campaign, and we are looking at it to extend over a 3-year period, starting with last month. The board, both the current members of the board and some past members of the board, Don Knox, where did you sit down? There he is. So Don Knox is one of our emeritus members of the board, having served for I don't know how many decades, a long time. So all of us are all in on supporting the college, and I think I've been clear to give you a number. The board, which is currently 22 members, has already committed so far, it's not final yet, over $150,000. So, see, I knew that if I said that I would get all emotional. We are fully committed to keeping this jewel that is in Jerusalem with these fabulous people as part of what we believe God is calling us to do. And I believe that I am here to just tell you that this is just the beginning of our capital campaign. We will be inviting people to contact you with your contact information and asking you to take the brochures, read through them, prayerfully consider what you can do to help us out over these next 3 years. And the last thing is, just to follow on with what Dean Richard ended with, is please share your stories. Share your experiences, what it meant to you. That's the best thing that we can do for the pilgrimages that St. George's offers. And we do want to get back to doing that as soon as possible. So, and I think we have one more person who's going to talk. Yes.
Speaking about the power of pilgrimage, our senior warden, Chris Brown, was on pilgrimage with St. Peter's in the Woods in 2019, and he's going to close us out with just a couple observations of your time and in the land of the Holy One. Thanks, Chris.
Good evening, and thank you all for allowing us, the family here at St. Peter's in the Woods, to host this event this evening. It's very powerful at many levels, and Dean Richard, you used the word transformational earlier. And as I was thinking about my own experience on the pilgrimage, it really, for me, it goes back to when I visited Israel in 1983, and I was in the Navy at the time, and it was a port visit. And it was before the barracks in Beirut blew up. But I visited really almost as a tourist. You know, I wasn't a pilgrim. I went to see things. It was a time when it was much more permissible. It was actually ironic because back then to go from the Al-Aqsa and then go down to the Western Wall, you had to process along this trail at the time, long since been excavated. It's a remarkable change since then. But I'll never forget there were these magnetometers and the IDF was screening. And it's the only one I've ever been to where they were screening in both directions. It was so odd, but it gave me an appreciation for the challenge of the land, the geography, but I was a visitor. And it wasn't until I went back as a pilgrim that it was truly transformational. And, you know, we talk about transformation, you know, as a graduate in high school going off to college and leaving your family, that transformational moment. We talk about other transformational moments, getting married, having children. For me, the biggest spiritual transformation I had was on that pilgrimage because I wasn't a visitor. To go as a pilgrim, and as Dean Richards says, it's in color. If things that you have sort of learned about from afar take on such a much more personal meaning. And without getting into all of the examples, but for me, earlier on in my faith journey, like some might have struggled with, you know, tell me, how could these miracles really work? How could it be? And it wasn't until I visited the places themselves that I said, yes, it was, it happened. So it was transformational for me, and it was only possible because of St. George and the program that Mary June and Dean Richard and others curated. It's a wonderful term, curate. We weren't visitors, we were pilgrims, and we were able to experience the Holy Land in a way that I would never have imagined, in a way that was transformational. And so the reason I think we should commit to St. George is so that others can have that opportunity. Despite the terrible place we find ourselves now, we are optimistic, and we like to think, and we pray and hope and will work towards that day when pilgrims can return. And to do that, we got to make sure that St. George's is ready. So it's probably a little different going into stewardship season, making a plug for somebody other than St. Peter's, but I think it's appropriate for us. It's necessary and needed for us to think of what a special place St. George's is and how it's so critical in its life right now that it be there for other pilgrims. And so I'm at one level incredibly thankful for that transformative experience in my spiritual journey, but it's also a call to action because others who haven't had that chance need it. It's that important. So thank you for making the trip. Thank you, Reverend Susan. Thank you all for your time. As you've heard me say before, time is perishable, and the fact that you've chosen to spend it with us this evening is a true gift. So thank you.
And before I close us with a prayer, I do want to say thank you to all the folks, including Chris Brown and his wife, Mary Beth, and our team of pilgrims who helped make this event possible, shopping and putting the food out and getting everything ready. And it was a delight to welcome you. And I did want to pass on the greetings from our bishop, Mark Stevenson, and Bishop Gail Harris, and our canon to the ordinary, Drew Hazel, who all send their kind regards. And of course, we're sorry they weren't able to be with us tonight, but the Diocese of Virginia sends you their love, and we're well represented here. So I'd like to lead us with a closing prayer. So let us pray. Gracious God, whose light shines out of darkness and whose love radiates from every holy thing, you challenge us to grow our capacities so that we show that godly light and love. Give us the compassion, courage, and generosity that Jesus showed when he walked the earth, teaching among all the people he encountered. Help us to embrace Jesus' will for such a global communion, a communion witnessed each day by all who pilgrim and work at St. George's College in Jerusalem. Let our actions and efforts at this difficult time now help to sustain the mission of St. George's. Let our light shine on this mission for peace, formation, and reconciliation for all peoples, a mission to reveal the kingdom Jesus the Christ proclaimed. May your light continue to shine in our hearts and on the future of St. George's College in Jerusalem. As a Palestinian sibling encourages us to offer, pray not for Arab or Jew, for Palestinian or Israeli, but pray rather for ourselves, that we might not divide them in our prayers, but keep them together in our hearts. Amen. Please join us for some more dessert and time for conversation. We're so glad that you're here.